Today, we're taking apart one of the most tangled and disturbing criminal enterprises of our time. We're going to look past the shocking headlines to really understand the machine, the system, that allowed Jeffrey Epstein to operate for decades, right out in the open.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? This wasn't just about one man's depravity. It was about a system that protected him, a system that enabled him. So how on earth did an empire built on abuse and fraud manage to survive seemingly untouchable for so long?
Well, to really get it, you have to stop thinking about it as just a series of crimes. You have to see it for what it was, a meticulously built machine. We're calling it an impunity engine. And just like any engine, it has different parts that all have to work together. That's what we're going to do here. We're going to take that engine apart, piece by piece.
All right, so here's our game plan for taking this machine apart. First, we'll look at the fuel source, the myth of Epstein as a financial genius. Then, we're going to map out the core criminal operation itself, what we're calling the trafficking pyramid. After that, we'll dig into the powerful social and legal firewall that made him seem invincible. And finally, we'll look at how the entire engine just seized up and fell apart.
So let's start at the very beginning, because everything, and I mean everything, was built on a lie. The whole operation was propped up by this carefully crafted persona of Jeffrey Epstein as some kind of brilliant, self-made Wall Street wizard. But when you look closer, it all falls apart.
So how did this all start? Well, his career path is just bizarre. Here's a guy who dropped out of college, yet somehow he lands a job teaching physics at the Dalton School, one of the most elite private schools in New York City. This was never about teaching. It was his ticket to the world of the super rich. He gets fired, but not before he charms his way through a parent-teacher conference into a meeting with Ace Greenberg, the CEO of Bear Stearns. Next thing you know, he's on Wall Street, and in just 4 years, he's a limited partner. That's a jump that should have taken an MBA and a decade of work. Then, just as fast as he arrived, he's gone, starting his own firm. But with whose money? And that question leads us right to this quote. This is from Stephen Hoffenberg. He's the guy who went to federal prison for running the Towers financial Ponzi scheme, one of the biggest frauds in American history before Bernie Madoff came along. And Hoffenberg has always said that Epstein was his right-hand man, the architect of the scam. Now let's talk about this number. $475 million. That's how much was stolen from investors in that Towers financial scheme. According to Hoffenberg, this stolen cash was the seed money for Epstein's entire operation. It's what let a guy with no real background or family money suddenly start acting like a billionaire financier. It gave him the veneer of legitimacy he needed to make his next big move.
And this is where things go from shady to absolutely mind-boggling. Epstein uses that newfound reputation to get close to a real billionaire, Leslie Wexner, the founder of L Brands, Victoria's Secret. And in 1991, Wexner gives Epstein full power of attorney. Now, this is not just financial advice. This is literally handing over the keys to the kingdom. It means Epstein could buy, sell, borrow, and move money in Wexner's name with zero oversight. He had total control of a billion-dollar fortune.
And that total control wasn't just numbers on a page. It turned into real, tangible things. The stuff we all associate with Epstein. A lot of it came directly from Wexner's portfolio. That massive Manhattan townhouse, one of the biggest private homes in the city, transferred from Wexner. The infamous Boeing 727 private jet, linked to Wexner. The New Mexico ranch, the Ohio property, even his controversial tax setup in the U.S. Virgin Islands, it all traces back to this one relationship. The myth of the self-made financier was now complete, built with someone else's real assets. Okay, so he's built this massive financial foundation. But what for? What was the real purpose of this machine? That brings us to the dark heart of it all, the criminal operation itself. And you have to understand, this wasn't random. It was a structured, organized business.
At its core was this truly insidious recruitment model. It was basically a multi-level marketing scheme for human trafficking. Epstein himself rarely found the victims. He used a network of recruiters, often tragically former victims themselves, to find and groom new girls. The recruiter would get paid a cash bonus, like a finder's fee, for every new girl she brought in. It was a monstrous system that not only insulated Epstein from direct involvement, but also twisted victims into becoming part of the machine, guaranteeing a constant supply. And this pyramid scheme wasn't a one-man show. No, it was a staffed enterprise with key lieutenants running the day-to-day. At the very top, you had Ghislaine Maxwell, his convicted partner who acted as the chatelaine, managing the homes and using her high society status to make the whole horrifying situation seem normal to young women.
But there were others, Sarah Kellen, who allegedly scheduled the so-called massages, assistants like Adriana Ross and Leslie Groff, who handled all the travel and logistics, and Nadia Marcinkova, another key figure. These 4 women were so central to the operation that they were later named as potential co-conspirators in his infamous immunity deal. So you've got this fake financial empire and this horrifying criminal operation running side by side. The big question is, how did he get away with it for so long? The answer is the next part of the engine, a brilliant 2-layered shield he built around himself, a firewall.
The first layer of this firewall was all about social camouflage. Epstein poured millions of dollars into places like Harvard and MIT. He hosted conferences with Nobel Prize-winning scientists. He branded himself as a philanthropist of science. Now, this had nothing to do with a love of knowledge. It was a cynical, calculated strategy to launder his reputation. When you surround yourself with that kind of prestige, it makes it really hard for people to believe the dark rumors swirling around you.
Now, when we talk about who is in his orbit, it is absolutely critical to understand the difference between these 2 pieces of evidence. The Black Book is basically a fancy Rolodex. It has thousands of names, plumbers, princes, politicians. Just being in it doesn't prove anything. The flight logs, though, that's a different story. Those are hard evidence. They show exactly who was on his private jets, where they went, and on what date. For an investigator trying to piece things together, those logs are gold.
And then we get to the second layer of this firewall, the legal one. And honestly, this might be the most jaw-dropping part of the whole story. Back in 2008, Florida police had a mountain of evidence against him. But the federal prosecutor at the time, Alexander Acosta, cut a secret deal with Epstein's lawyers. It was called a non-prosecution agreement, or NPA. And it meant that Epstein completely avoided federal sex trafficking charges, which could have put him away for life, and instead pleaded to minor state charges. He ended up serving just 13 months in a county jail, and he got to leave for work most days.
But here's the kicker, the really unbelievable part of this deal. The NPA didn't just protect Epstein. It gave a blanket grant of federal immunity to his 4 named lieutenants, Maxwell, Kellen, Groff, and Ross. And then it included this insane clause. It also protected any potential co-conspirators. Think about that. With the stroke of a pen, the federal government shut down its own ability to investigate anyone else involved in this trafficking network. It was the ultimate legal shield. It made the entire enterprise untouchable for more than a decade.
So with a shield that powerful, how did this whole thing finally come crashing down? Well, the final chapter is all about how that seemingly impenetrable engine of impunity finally broke.
It all started with dogged, relentless investigative journalism. Julie K. Brown at the Miami Herald published a series called Perversion of Justice. She tracked down the victims from that 2008 case, the ones who had been completely ignored and silenced by that secret deal. The stories created a tidal wave of public outrage, so much so that federal prosecutors in New York felt they had to act. They reopened the case, and on July 6, 2019, the minute Epstein's private jet landed from Paris, they arrested him.
And this time, things were different. The judge wasn't buying any of it. Bail was denied. Why? Because when prosecutors searched his mansion safe, what they found was straight out of a spy thriller. Piles of cash, a bunch of loose diamonds, and the smoking gun. A fake passport from Austria with his picture but a different name, listing a residence in Saudi Arabia. That, plus his constant international travel, was enough for the judge to declare him an extreme flight risk. He was sent straight to the Metropolitan Correctional Center.
What happened next is, to this day, just a massive question mark. Because on the night he died, you had this total cascade of failures at a supposedly maximum security federal prison. The 2 guards who were supposed to be watching him, they fell asleep and were browsing the internet for hours. Then they faked the logbooks to say they'd done their checks. The 2 security cameras pointed right at his cell. They mysteriously malfunctioned. And, in a huge breach of protocol, especially for an inmate who had recently been on suicide watch, his cellmate was transferred out, and he was left completely alone.
So the official ruling from the New York City Medical Examiner was suicide by hanging. Case closed, right? Not so fast. The family hired their own expert, a famous forensic pathologist named Dr. Michael Baden, and you basically have 2 highly respected experts looking at the exact same physical evidence and coming to completely opposite conclusions. The big disagreement is over a few broken bones in his neck. Dr. Baden says those breaks are classic signs of strangulation. The official examiner says, no, they can happen in hangings. And that fundamental disagreement is why all the questions about his death just won't go away.
And that's what leaves us here, with this one big lingering question.
Jeffrey Epstein is gone. His main accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, is serving a long prison sentence. But this whole saga revealed more than just the crimes of a few people. It exposed the vulnerabilities in our systems, financial, social, and legal, that allowed this to happen in the first place. It showed how extreme wealth and power can bend the rules. So yeah, one man is gone, but we have to ask ourselves, has the engine he built truly been dismantled? Or do the parts just lie there, waiting for the next person to come along and put them back together?